we need to talk about Diogo Jota and the impact that his tragic death and the grief that Liverpool FC are feeling is having on their form this season. Diogo's tragic death in a car crash, along with his brother Andre Silva, shook the sporting world, as well as obviously changing the world of his friends, his family, and his club. But when we look at what's unfolded since his death, and specifically in the slump that Liverpool FC are facing, it really does reveal a wider universal truth about grief. What this episode is crucially about is what happens to any group where there is a death and where we collectively have to feel and process and move forwards with our grief. Whether a family, a football team that I'm sure feels like a family, a workplace, a friendship group, when grief hits a connected system, every part of that system feels it, and there can be some big impacts. And in Liverpool's case, until their win at West Ham on Sunday, they'd had in the previous 12 games 9 defeats, from champions to their worst form. And obviously this episode is going to be about Liverpool FC, but I want to also acknowledge and put my hand on my heart and say that obviously the people really at the epicenter of this and the people who will be feeling the most hurt in that forwards path are obviously Diogo and Andre's family and beloved ones. So I want to walk through this gentle exploration of the grief that Liverpool FC will be feeling through both an individual as well as a collective lens. And I thought, let's start at the individual. Because for each of us, our grief will be unique. Much like our fingerprint, our experience of it is completely different to every other person around us. And what that means is that every single player, every single person in the management team will be holding and moving forwards with their grief in a unique way. And it's really important to stress that grief isn't just sadness, it's a full body response within which our nervous system gets dysregulated and we go into a stress response. And this is because when someone dies, that change is forced upon us in a moment, which causes our nervous system to go into threat mode, whether that's in fight, flight, or freeze and shut down. Our cortisol and adrenaline rises, our heart rates can spike, our sleep can become disrupted, our appetite can change, our muscles can tighten, and other physical responses, as well as finding it difficult to focus on any other things with a very common symptom of grief, the brain fog. But when you think of all of those things and then think to an athlete whose regime is strictly controlled, who is trying to optimize on their diet, optimize on their nutrition, trying to be at that most present, at their most alert, because actually a split second on a football pitch can make all of the difference in a game. When you're trying to do that while your body is also responding to your grief and you're in that dysregulated state, finding that high performance can be really, really difficult. And there can obviously be impacts to it. Whether you're a professional athlete or taking it out into any other career where we're expected to show up to be on our A game, I think that there's a real lack of understanding just generally out there in the working world that actually grief isn't something that we just get over. It doesn't disappear 2 weeks after the funeral. There's longer term impacts, and actually, we need a lot of support and grace and compassion as we navigate this forwards path. Because the reality is, grief makes it harder for us to concentrate. It makes it harder for us to make quick decisions. It makes it harder for us to regulate our emotions. It makes it harder for us to be able to give our peak performance because actually our grief is demanding so much of our energy. So it's really important to acknowledge and to be compassionate to the fact that Liverpool FC didn't just lose a beloved teammate in Diogo. Actually, what will have happened is that every single player in the squad who knew Diogo, obviously excluding perhaps new players that have come in since, as well as the same in the management team, that all of them, their nervous system will have literally shifted overnight. And that it takes time for us to be able to move through our grief, to find that expanded capacity for our nervous system, what's called our window of tolerance. We want to gently expand that back out. Ultimately, for Liverpool FC, this change has been forced upon them. And the majority of people in the club, basically everybody who knew Diogo, is in some way going to be impacted. So next up, I thought let's take it from individual grief into collective grief. And collective grief is exactly as it sounds. It's a collective experience where there's a shared experience of grief. And one of the most famous showings of collective grief that is just etched into my mind is when Princess Diana died. And that absolute outpouring of grief. So we often see collective grief when celebrities die. But when we hone it in on Liverpool FC, let's firstly look to the team and their management. And the fact that these emotions, this experience of grief, it's not just moving through the individual, but it's moving through the group. And what happens within our nervous system is we humans were built on connection. We respond to other people's emotional states, to their nervous system states. You know, that sense where someone around you is feeling quite stressed out and that anxiousness is catching for you, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, you're making me feel nervous now. It's exactly the same when we look to collective grief. Our nervous systems, our emotional responses, we can sync and be influenced by those around us. So, what can happen when a group loses someone who they love is the emotional baseline, that what we normally call in a regulated state, we have co regulation, where when we all show up and we're confident and we're feeling calm and grounded, that is contagious. Or those people who are infectious and bring the joy into the room. And from what I've heard about Diogo, he was that person. But what can happen in the counter to that is when a group goes through the collective grief and the trauma, obviously, of such a tragic death, when that emotional baseline shifts, it can result in a dropping of morale, in motivation shifting, in roles and relationships feeling really uncertain, because actually in grief there are so many secondary losses associated with the loss of that human. And Diogo's role within the team, what he brought, his energy, his spirit, there will be so many different secondary losses within the team that will also be a very destabilizing force as they come to terms with him not being there. And within grief as well, there can be identity shifting, there can be shifting in meaning, in our purpose, in what's most important to us in life. And this is really made quite complex by the fact that all of the players are holding their grief on such a public stage. And at the heart of this and the dysregulation that grief brings, it really does shake our collective, as well as obviously individual, that sense of safety. And I know that when it comes to us grappling with losses that come outside of the natural order, like Diogo's death at such a young age and from such a big tragedy, it can shake us to our core. But then when we think about the pressures of a club, it's not like the whole of Liverpool FC could say, okay, we're just going to take the season off. And this is obviously mirrored in the majority of our careers as well. There's a real pressure in grief for us to get back to business as usual, because obviously there's a commercial bottom line that needs us to show up as our best selves. But the thing is that grief doesn't know any timeline, and grief doesn't really care about what's going on in our work. And all that grief is really calling for is the space to be felt, the space to be expressed, the space to be honored. And obviously, I will caveat that I don't know what the inner workings of Liverpool FC are, and I'm sure that they've got some really important work that's happening to support the players, the management team, the staff. But I want to make an important note for anyone who's maybe tuning into this episode and in an organization where grief, whether it's collective grief or individual grief, isn't being held, isn't being supported in the right way, that actually grief does have a knock-on impact on our performance, on our team cohesion, on our decision making, on our energy and how we can show up on any given day. And actually, when I connect into my own journey, and if I mean, I've got the grief of my daughter I could speak to, grief of my grandparents, but I want to really hone in on me when I worked in the sporting world. I used to work in Formula One, and I was one of the heads of marketing for Formula One itself. And I had a miscarriage in my final year in Formula One. It was a miscarriage that actually shone a spotlight on what I really wanted to do in my life, and I eventually exited the sport. But I can also say that in that high pressure environment, me suppressing and numbing my grief, it didn't help my performance. In fact, it really served to disconnect me, and probably was, in truth, one part of my catalyst for me leaving my organization. And just this year, actually, there are two organizations who I support through my coaching, and both of them have had really tragic and quite sudden deaths that have really shaken up those teams. And it's been really interesting to witness, actually, just that response. And again, how quickly organizations move forwards. But what I know, and through my work that I offer to organizations like these, that there's real power when we can just carve out some sacred space once a month to allow for grievers to come together, to allow for that continued conversation and exploration of how are we really feeling in our grief. Because through those conversations, we can really understand, okay, what's going on? wears the team out, and we can be front footed with it. And now, again, I will say I know nothing about how Liverpool FC are responding to this. And I will also say that I would fully anticipate that there would be a massive impact in performance regardless because of such a seismic loss, as well as just the practicalities of the Premier League and of any high flying sports team and the expectations and just where you really do have to show up because, yeah, you can't have your whole team checking out. And the next part of collective grief that I wanted to spotlight is that of the fans, because obviously the fan base is hurting too. And there's a beautiful tribute that they continue to do at the 20th minute of any game where they honor Jota, singing a song that is a beautiful way to continue that bond with him. And that is a wonderful example where our collective grief can bring us together in those shows of support. But also, I think it's a really important one when we think about the collective grief that the players and the staff are all feeling, is that actually this does place some complexities on the pitch and on the players, because obviously in that high profile space, they are trying to perform at their best. And grief has a habit of surfacing at any moment in time. Obviously, with that ritual happening in that 20th minute, the complexities here are that you've got players who are already grieving, who might have their grief just erupting in that 20th minute as the fans are so beautifully and powerfully honoring Diogo. And when we're trying to focus, whether that's on the pitch, whether that's for any of us more broadly in our careers, is our unconscious can trigger with our grief. It can, in a second, send our nervous system back into fight, flight, freeze, shutdown mode. And I'm not here to say that these tributes are bad. I'm here to say they're very much beautiful. But it's just really important to obviously consider the fact that the players are all grieving in a very public space, and a public space where they don't have control over how the fans want to honor Jota or what a journalist or a pundit is going to ask them. So stepping out to the broader picture and obviously the discourse around Liverpool FC and their drop in form. It's really heartening to see that a lot of the media are speaking about grief. And actually, I've been watching some really rich conversations in the sports media space where they're bringing psychotherapists in to talk about the impact of grief, which are all conversations that are so needed. And so I just want to add my voice into the mix to just say with my compassion, obviously appreciating I'm not a Liverpool FC fan, so I have no vested interest in where they place in the Premier League table. But I want to say that actually, for me, I hope that everybody can see Liverpool FC this season with a huge dose of compassion, to give them grace and to appreciate that they are going through a lot, both individual and collective grief. There is a lot to bear. Because I think we need to remember when it comes to Liverpool FC or anyone in any workplace where they're expected to show up and perform, that actually when we're grieving, our nervous system literally doesn't care. Whether we're a Premier League player, whether we're someone working in a corporate office, whether we're someone working in a hospital, our nervous system does not care. Grief is a universal experience. It impacts us all. And our grief doesn't switch off when we walk out on the pitch or when there's cameras rolling. So I mentioned this earlier in the episode, and I just wanted to say it again from my perspective as someone who works in the grief space. Liverpool FC's slump in form doesn't surprise me at all. I just think when it comes to the grief conversation that it's probably been quite underrepresented in the media, where athletes have been forced to bear their grief in silence and to perhaps not speak about it. And it's important to note as well that in the survivorship bias that is prevalent in the media, that obviously we will always hear about those victory in the face of grief stories, whether that's Charles Leclerc winning in F2 after his dad died, whether it's him winning in F1 after his friend Antoine Hubert died in Spa, whether it's Tiger Woods breaking down in tears after winning the Open after his dad's death. These stories are all absolutely wonderful and heartwarming and really do show the depth of human resilience. I think it's really important to spotlight that while Liverpool FC's form is not at their champion status of last season, actually for me, I know that they are really rooting into and demonstrating their resilience in how they're showing up every single day in the face of such tragedy and grief. So, what does this teach us all about grief? It's that whether you're a professional footballer, whether you're in a workplace, whether in a family, whether in a friendship group, it's the fact that when someone dies, actually, the whole system in its own way will feel it both individually and collectively. That it's normal for our performance to temporarily change, for our inner worlds and how we're feeling it in our body to change, for our behavior to change, for our priorities to change. Grief really does reorganize us in brain, in nervous system, in our heart, and where we want to go in this world. And that pressure to bounce back, that pressure to move on, that pressure to just get over it is an absolute fallacy, because we as humans, in our response to grief and other emotional responses, we're built to feel, we're built to move through it, we're built to integrate, we're built to navigate our forwards path with grief as a part of us. So if you're personally grieving, or perhaps your family, your friendship groups, your team, your workplace, and others are grieving, let this be your reminder. Grief is not this annoying disruption to life that we can just push away. Grief is life. It's a part of us being human. And when we tend to it with openness, gentleness, collective compassion, that's how we find our way forwards to all of the successes that lie in our forwards path. So that completes this episode of Death on the Daily. Whether you're a Liverpool FC fan or not, I hope that you've taken something from it in how we can connect in with compassion, empathy, and grace to ourselves as well as to others in this griefy path forwards. If this episode resonated with you, if you want to get more doses of Death on the Daily, I would love it. And it also really helps to support my mission if you could just hit that subscribe button. And wherever you are in your journey, whatever you're holding and however you're navigating that forwards path, know that I'm here. Death on the Daily is always here with supportive conversations, and I'm sending you lots of love. Thank you for joining me on Death on the Daily. If you like this episode, it would mean a lot if you could hit subscribe. Plus, head to the show notes to find out about my work as a grief coach, and there's a grief journaling freebie there for you. Until we meet here next time, take good care of yourself and others.
There's a cold fire, there's a crossfire, and there's some